Just minutes after the crash of the first Babylift mission, rescue workers are on the scene searching for survivors. Almost everyone in the cargo area was killed instantly when the plane slammed down the second time. The dead, the injured, and the survivors are taken to hospitals in Saigon and Thailand.
Since I was not injured, I just took a seat and was waiting for my mother while they brought in a lot of the babies. Then somebody came over to me and told me that my mother had died. I remember holding on for dear life, so she said, "Come over here and sit with me."
Barb Adams' last decision was to be near her daughter.
Just as I sat down on the floor, we must have hit. She flew forward somewhere. And that's the last time I saw my mother.
"175 people survived the crash of the Air Force jet. But more than 150 have been killed. More than half of them were children.
And it was really such a blow in what had already been a very tragic, sad story of the collapse of South Vietnam. And then who would have thought that in the middle of all that tragedy, that the American Air Force would crash a plane full of Vietnamese babies and small children.
The investigation begins immediately. The next day, along with the investigators, Captain Bud Traynor returns to the smoldering wreckage of his plane on a special mission of his own.
I had to leave a couple of crew members out at the aircraft, and so I went back the next morning.
The bodies of 2 dead crewmen are still pinned down by the wreckage.
So we took a lot of tie-down chains and put them together and did the old heave-ho with a whole lot of people to move the flap of wreckage that was pinning the 2 crew members. And we got them out of there. It's always important to finish the job, and we did. But then I had a very naive approach to what was going to happen next. I kind of envisioned the guys in the silver helmets and put out the white rope. This is going to be a secure site. That was when I got the shock that, hey, there are no guards out here. There's a Vietnamese soldier going through my suitcase wearing my flight jacket. And he had an AR-15, and I didn't.
That's my jacket. I'm Bud Traynor.
And we established that my coat had the same name on it.
It's mine.
As my flight suit. And so the coat he was wearing was mine. So he begrudgingly gave me my coat and then proceeded to go through the rest of my suitcase.
It's not only Traynor's jacket. Looters are picking the plane clean. Dave Scheiding is a structural engineer with the Air Force.
When we got to the site, we had some concern to begin with because there was a tremendous amount of civilian people out there actually picking up parts, which, of course, that didn't help us much as far as the investigation goes.
He's part of a team that goes to Saigon to try to figure out why the plane crashed.
This investigation was very unique from a couple of standpoints. The first standpoint, of course, the people taking parts away from us, but second, the country was in extreme chaos. It was essentially falling.
Frank Huskin is also part of the investigative team.
The NVA and the Viet Cong are all around, and we were only out there during the daytime, but it was a very uncomfortable feeling. Very uncomfortable feeling.
One of the first things we wanted to rule out was sabotage and a bomb. So we brought in dogs from the Philippines, bomb-sniffing dogs.
Take him back there to the rear of the plane.
With North Vietnamese soldiers so close, a direct attack or sabotage are obvious theories.
Initially, they had all thought that it had been a bomb placed in the luggage compartment, or it had been a missile that shot the plane down.
During the rush to board the aircraft, personal luggage was loaded but not thoroughly checked. This added to the speculation that a bomb may have been smuggled on board. The dogs find no trace of a bomb, and investigators find no evidence of explosive residue on the plane. It clearly wasn't attacked, but something had caused the cargo door to fail.
We had to find the doors, if at all possible, to make sure that we didn't have a problem with other C5s that would cause this type of crash.
Soon, the massive C5As will be desperately needed to get America out of Vietnam. Finding out what happened to this one couldn't be more urgent.
It was beyond important. At the time, we had approximately 100 C5 aircraft. We grounded the C5s until such time that we could figure out, one, what the problem was, and two, what were we going to do to prevent it from happening again.
Hey, guys!
As they examine the wreckage, investigators also try to find out why the crew had such difficulty controlling the plane.
Look how this is sheared off.
The cables that Ray Snediger saw leaking hydraulic fluid were the ones that controlled the plane's elevator. Since the elevator controls pitch, Captain Trainer had no way of guiding his plane up and down.
Cargo bay! Declare an emergency. Saigon. Emergency. Return to base.
When there's no control of the elevator, which allows for up and down pitch, an airplane will set up an oscillation up and down. His oscillation started as nose was going down, and then it picked up speed, and then it started pitching up.
A falling plane's aerodynamic properties will force it to follow a predictable pattern. As lift increases, the nose naturally tilts upwards. Without the elevators to counteract the motion, it will continue until the plane moves so slowly that it stalls, falling back to the ground. It explains the strange motion of the giant C5A. By adjusting the thrust to his engines, Trainer was able to keep the jet from rising and falling. Investigators believe the cables were sheared off when the cargo door exploded from the plane. But they still don't know why the door failed in the first place.
Then we made the determination we were going to have to try and find the doors.
But the doors are somewhere at the bottom of the South China Sea.
Our next problem was trying to figure out the ballistics of those doors. Nobody had ever even thought of figuring out ballistics of two doors flying through the air from 23,000 feet.
Relying on the airspeed and the altitude at the moment of decompression, investigators learned the plane was 46 kilometers from the coast of Vietnam.
When the doors went out, the airplane was moving across the water at about 600 feet per second. Therefore, we had to come down with a pretty good estimate for the Navy to even know where to look.
Ships from the U.S. 7th Fleet crisscross the South China Sea looking for the rear door. For the first several days, they can't find anything. The South China Sea has swallowed the evidence. At the crash site, investigators are becoming increasingly frustrated. A great deal of wreckage has been stolen by scavengers. An important clue could be among the pieces taken away. To retrieve these parts, the Air Force offers to buy them back.
The strategy was to provide leaflets throughout the city of Saigon and the surrounding area. We want every piece of material from the aircraft back, and we will also pay you if you will turn this in to us.
11 days after the crash, flyers are delivered to local officials and distributed throughout the city. Investigators do eventually recover the camera that was used by a film crew on board the plane. They hope it can show them exactly what happened. But the film inside the camera has already been removed. Another piece of the wreck turned in during the buyback program is just what they're looking for.
We were trying to get the black boxes back because that's the thing we really wanted.
All C5As are fitted with a computer system that records vital information about the plane's operation. It records engine settings, airspeed, altitude, and hundreds of other parameters onto a magnetic tape. The system is called Mayday, Malfunction Detection Analysis and Recording System. It wasn't found at the crash site. The Mayday is eventually returned for a reward, but it proves to be a disappointment.
It didn't identify the reason for the doors and the ramps failing, but it did provide us a sequence of events in a lot of areas, including altitude, airspeed, the performance of the aircraft itself during that time frame.
As investigators continue to look for the cause of the crash, the situation in Vietnam gets worse. 2 days after they receive the Mayday, the South Vietnamese president resigns. On April the 23rd, 100,000 North Vietnamese troops approach Saigon. The noose around the city is tightening quickly.
While we were out in the rice paddy, you could see burning hamlets and villages, and in the distance they were on fire. You could hear the explosions and so forth of mortars.
While the situation in Vietnam continues to unravel, the US Navy finally has some success at sea. On April the 26th, they find the cargo ramp and part of the pressure door of Trainer's plane. If investigators don't find the answers here, they may not find them anywhere. They're running out of time, and they're running out of leads. When the ramp is examined, investigators make a disturbing discovery.
On that ramp, 2 of the stirrups were in great condition. They were perfect. They had not failed, so obviously it told us that at least 2 of the locks had just unlocked themselves.
The C5A has 14 locks holding the rear cargo door shut, 7 on each side. The door recovered from the sea tells investigators that for some reason, 3 of the locks designed to hold it shut had either unlocked in flight or had never locked at all.
This flight was actually like a ticking bomb. When they closed the ramps, all those locks would look like they were in a locked position. When it took off, the fuse was lit. And as the aircraft climbed out, the fuse kept burning.
As the plane climbed away from Saigon, the pressure outside the jet dropped. The air inside pushed with increasing force against the cargo door. Then, as the plane passed through 23,000 feet, with 3 latches unlocked, the pressure on the door was too much.
With the 3 locks that failed all in a row, it was just too much load for the other 4 locks to actually pick up, and which resulted in the catastrophic failure of the ramp itself.
But investigators still don't know why the locks failed. Before they can find the answer, the situation in Vietnam deteriorates completely. Saigon is under siege. On April the 27th, the investigators take all of the evidence they can and leave. It's simply too dangerous to stay.
When we left Saigon, we were the last two C-141s to leave Tonson Air Base. They were essentially losing their country at that time, and after that, it was only helicopters that got out.
Investigators hope they have all the clues they need to solve the mystery of the crash. They know they won't be coming back to Vietnam to look for any more. April the 30th, 1975. The war in Vietnam ends. From the rooftop of the American embassy, the last remaining Americans in Vietnam are flown to safety. Back in the United States, investigators continue their work. Since the C5 is in service around the world, they need to know why 3 locks on the cargo door failed.
When we got back to Texas, it was to help us verify the failure sequence.
Investigators discover something potentially alarming about the cargo plane's rear door. Parts from the C5A were actually removed from the plane, cannibalized to service another cargo plane. The locks on the rear door of the C5A are connected to each other by a series of tie rods. The rods can be lengthened or shortened to ensure the locks are completely closed. It's these tie rods which were removed from the Babylift plane. At the time, the enormous cargo planes were in constant demand.
The Air Force was very short of parts, and so they came up with a standard practice for maintenance that they could cannibalize parts off of aircrafts that are not being flown. It's authorized and it's a good operation if you respect it and treat it properly.
The tie rods were replaced before the Babylift plane left for Saigon, but for some reason they hadn't held. To try to figure out what happened, investigators rebuild one of the locks that was supposed to keep the rear door closed.
We essentially built a working model of that ramp, and we had to do that because we didn't get all the parts back because of the people picking them up, parts out in the ocean and everything that we never got back.
Investigators aren't convinced that the problem is in the basic design of the lock. They suspect that before the plane left California, the engineers who replaced the rods didn't follow the proper procedures.
When we're talking about the locks, the distances that we're talking about are very, very small. We could be talking about the 16th, 32nd of an inch difference between being locked and unlocked.
The re-rigging was done before the plane left the United States.
Show me how you re-rig it.
After the locks were re-rigged, they should have checked to make sure they were working. That wasn't done. Without the check, no one would have noticed that the re-rigging was done improperly.
I would say that this accident actually started back at Travis Air Force Base in California. When the 2 tie rods that had been cannibalized earlier were replaced, they were not installed properly.
Loadmaster, close cargo bay doors.
When the door was opened and shut in Saigon, there was a warning that not everything was perfect.
We had some difficulty getting it to lock, so we had to open and close it 3-4 times. But it seemed to be routine, and in the heat of the moment, we didn't think anything about it.
But 12 minutes after liftoff, as the plane continued to climb, the 3 improperly closed locks were forced open by the building air pressure. The remaining locks could not take the extra load. The cargo door burst open and was torn off the fuselage.
You just can't take shortcuts. And if it's pulled a couple of rods out, run out and put them back in, that's not going to hack it.
The investigators have found their answers, and in their final report make specific recommendations that will make the C5A safer. As a result, the Air Force designs a pin that slips through each lock. If the door isn't properly shut, the pins can't slide into place.
We essentially Murphy-proofed it by putting steel pins in there so that when the lock is in the over-center position, if you can insert these safety pins, then you know that the system is properly rigged.
Ray Snedeker retired from the Air Force as a Chief Master Sergeant.
This mission was probably the most discouraging in some ways based on part of the outcome. But also, it was refreshing in the fact that we displayed such good airmanship, such courage, and we were able to save so many people.
After 28 years of service, Bud Traynor retired from the Air Force as a colonel.
I think everyone second guesses themselves to see if there was something else that they could do. I am very fortunate in that I never found something that I said, I sure wish I had done X. It just wasn't there.
That pilot did a super job. The fact that anybody survived this crash is just remarkable. The ones that were saved are very fortunate that that particular crew was in charge of that aircraft. Being a pilot myself and knowing they only had one aileron and 4 engines, by rights they all should have been dead.
The investigation board does not normally recommend decorations. That's not part of their job. But in this case, we recommended to the Air Force that they be considered for a high decoration.
Surviving crew members, including Captain Bud Traynor and Sergeant Ray Snedeker, were awarded medals by the Air Force for heroism and extraordinary achievement. One of the orphans that survived was baby Ina.
Ina?
Today, she's known as Kelly Jackson Brownlee.
April 4th, 1975. It's definitely a pivotal point in my life where I left part of myself behind in Vietnam.
When Operation Babylift resumed, Kelly, along with hundreds of other orphans, were flown to the United States. She was eventually adopted by a family near Seattle, Washington.
There was a 25-year anniversary in April of 2000, and it brought together all of the adults that were adopted from Vietnam. And I ended up meeting someone who was very special and actually ended up marrying.
Chris Brownlee and his wife Kelly were both airlifted out of Vietnam on April the 5th, 1975, one day after the crash.